All good. So we met each other about 2 years ago at an influencer event, and we've been keeping in touch. And I know you've been doing some very important work in the lives of others as a clinical psychologist,
Mhm.
and I just appreciate you being on.
Well, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So let's start here. Like, what
Who?
was your upbringing like? What is your story?
My story. So Isaiah knows this, but I do not share this story with very many people. I
Yeah.
keep this story typically very close to the chest. I've shared it on my own podcast, and I have felt nudges, maybe some gentle nudges, same, maybe some more forceful nudges to really actually tell my story, because a
Yeah.
lot of the time when people have me on their podcast and they're like, "Oh, tell me your story," and I kind of like tiptoe and I'm like, "Oh, like this is it," and then I leave out like the biggest part. So
Wow.
I'm not doing that today.
Hey.
I'm going to give you the full story. So my upbringing, I was born and raised in the south side of Chicago. So gang
Mhm,
infested territory. It's nine
mhm,
blocks big.
mhm.
I remember growing up, and it's this funny thing is it's the same neighborhood where my parents met.
Wow.
So they actually met a block over from where the house that I grew up in, because my dad immigrated here from Mexico when he was
Mhm.
22 years old, and he just happened to move in next door to my mom, and then they fell in love and then had three boys, and then 7 years later had yours truly.
Wow.
um
Okay.
they had to wait to get me. uh um and so grew up in this family in this gang infested territory, and I
Mhm.
would always wonder, like, why is my, like, why am I turning out a certain way, why are my brothers and I turning out of one way, and a lot of my peers are turning to get the gang, are turning to drugs,
Yeah.
are not doing well in school. Like,
Wow.
what is going on here? And it was something that I always kind of like wondered, because I
Mhm.
remember like one of my best friends growing up, she she just came from like a bad family, and I was like, and she wasn't doing well in school, and it was like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And then I got my answer when I was 13 years old. And so 13 years old, I remember sitting in a courtroom, and I had just spent the morning in the courtroom, like the courthouse, like cafeteria,
Mhm.
because they wanted to protect me from seeing all of the riffraff. That's what my
Mhm.
parents called it, like the riffraff.
The
Like, we
riffraff.
don't,
Okay.
we don't want to expose Andrea to like all the other cases that go through before like our case. And I was
Mhm.
like, okay. So I remember like sitting in the cafeteria and having like bad courthouse like cafeteria food.
Yes. Yeah. I imagine.
And then they pull me in with the
Mhm.
person that was like kind of hanging out with me, protecting me from the riffraff. And I remember, and I take the witness stand at the
Mhm.
age of 13. And
Wow.
my mother had already, so the DA, the district attorney, had already read my two older brothers' impact statements.
Mhm.
My mother had already taken the witness stand and read her impact statement. And then I took the stand to read my impact statement. And I talked about how this crime like impacted me and impacted my family.
Wow.
And the defendant didn't even look at me. As
Mm.
soon as I took the stand, I like looked straight at him, and he just kind of like put his head down, didn't look at me for the whole time that I was speaking.
Mm.
And so then, after all the impact statements are read, the judge goes in the back and he's thinking about like what he wants the sentence to be for the defendant. And
Mhm.
then he comes out. And I remember sitting there between my mom and my dad. And again, my brothers were not allowed in the room for various reasons that we can get into later.
Okay.
And I remember sitting there, and I'm holding my mom, like my mom and I are holding each other's hands just so tightly. And the judge like scans the courtroom, pauses his eyes on my parents and myself, takes one of those deep breaths, like, and then he delivers my life mission. And he says that even though all the criteria for the death penalty have been met in this case, It's not due to his moral or professional, or what's the word I'm looking for? Moral, or let's see, what was it that I was looking for? Like a objection to it. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
due to a moral objection. It's not due to
Mm-hmm.
a professional objection. It meets all the criteria for the death penalty, but he cannot sentence the defendant to death.
Wow.
And he goes on. So they say, like, and then he goes on to say, like, why. And he says, I cannot sentence this person to death because they had a bad childhood, a
Wow.
childhood that included neglect and abuse and violence and trauma. And so therefore, he will not be sentencing this person who took the life of somebody else, my brother,
Mm.
my best friend Cisco, to death.
I'm out front running all